Great, it is 5 o'clock. We do have live stream, so I will call the meeting to order. And Nene, would you please take the roll?
Yes. Max Starks,
Here.
Mary Kate Murin. Mary Kate.
Present.
Samalit Hogan is not attending. Norm Roldan,
Present.
Jeff Sattler.
Present.
Thank you.
Great, thank you, Nene. Thank you all. So why don't we jump right into our fiscal year 2022 single audit readout.
Okay. Thank you, and Happy New Year to everyone. So you may recall from our October 13th Ways and Means Committee that the FY22 single audit work was completed, but the report was not yet available. So I just wanted to kind of bring that to the forefront of your memory. The major program that was tested was HERF funds, so the higher ed emergency relief funds due to COVID. That was their focus of the audit. And there were no current year findings. There were also no prior year findings. So there were no updates that were required on either end. And so basically, again, there's really nothing else to report on the audit. There's nothing new since that October meeting. If we can scroll forward to, I believe it might be around slide 18, there will be a motion. And while that's coming up, I just wanted to share with the committee that O'Connor and Drew has merged with another firm. They are Witham, Smith, and Brown out of New Jersey. They are ranked as one of the top 25 firms in the country. And let's see, they have about $450 million in annual revenue. So, you know, significant resources, if you will. We will be maintaining our relationship with Mike Cosgrove and Lisa DeGiusto, so we're not going to see any negative changes from that. We'll still be able to work with the same team. So I just wanted to put that on everyone's radar and let you know. They do go by the name Witham. Again, so you may hear of that moving forward. Are there any questions on either the merger or the single audit?
Just one question on the merger. Were we well aware that was in the works?
They let us know. So this was effective on January 1st, and they let us know, I'm going to say it was around the beginning to mid of December. We had conversations. They wanted to give us a heads up before it happened. So yes, they let us know. Okay,
good. Thank you for that.
Yep.
Any questions of John on the report?
No.
Okay, excellent. Can I ask someone to read the motion, please?
Yeah, Mac, I'm happy to.
Thank you.
So FY 2022 single audit and agreed upon procedures. Move that the Springfield Technical Community College Board of Trustees Committee on Ways and Means, pursuant to the provision of Section 22, Chapter 15A, moves to recommend to the Board of Trustees the approval of the FY 2022 single audit and agreed upon procedures as presented.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Do I have a second?
Second.
Great, thank you, Jeff. Do we have any opposed? Okay, Nene, do you mind taking the roll for the motion, please?
Yes. Mary Kate Murin,
Yes.
Max Starks,
Yes.
Samalit Hogan, Norm Roldan,
Yes.
Jeff Sattler.
Yes.
Thank you.
Great, thank you, Nene, and thank you very much, everyone. With that, we'll move right into our fiscal year 2023 first quarter trust fund report.
And so I wanted to remind everyone, this is a requirement of the trust fund guidelines that we present the trust fund reports to you. This is the first quarter, as was indicated. And these expenses or these trust funds do not include the state appropriations, grants, investment income, HERF funds, or depreciation. So I just, again, like to remind everyone what we are looking at and what won't be included. With this being the first quarter, I don't want to belabor the reports any more than is necessary, but there are a couple of items that I would like to point out. You are currently looking at the General Education Trust Fund, and overall the revenues and expenses are where we would expect to see them. The tuition and fee revenues are up slightly as a result of enrollment for the fall semester coming in above budget. You won't see, and we won't recognize the use of reserve. So it's the last line. I know it's a little bit hard to see on this view, but you won't see the last line on the revenue line, the $4 million use of reserves. We have not recognized the use of that yet. We likely won't be recognizing the use of those funds until we get closer towards the end of the year. But I just wanted to point that out since it is a larger transaction. And again, everything seems to be in line with expectations for the first quarter. If I can move to the next slide. This is our health trust fund. And again, generally, everything is falling in line. There's really nothing to call out at this stage. Revenues and expenses for the first quarter are where we would expect to see them. And if we can move to the following slide, this is our capital improvement trust fund. Once again, the revenues are going to be up just slightly due to the increase in enrollment as compared to budget. And you won't see any expenses in the NN line, the capital improvement expenditure line. As you may recall, we do spend the carryover funds first. So we're working on that. So you won't see any expenditures at this point in time. Before I move to the vendor expenditure report, are there any questions on the trust fund reports?
Well done. No questions from me.
No.
Okay, thank you. Can we move to the next slide, please? Okay, and again, here are the first quarter vendor expenditure reports for any vendors that we spent $20,000 or more through the first quarter. And again, I'm just calling out, there is a column that recognizes if we're going to be capitalizing a portion, all or a portion of those expenses. So those have been identified. So far, we haven't recognized any expenses that are being funded from DCAM that exceeds $20,000. And again, as you, I think, are accustomed to seeing, this is a relatively small listing at first quarter. This is, will grow to be about a page or two worth of transactions once we get closer to the end of the year.
Thank you, John. Is there anything here that's unexpected?
No, these are our normal the expenses that we would typically expect to see that we have planned for. So nothing's jumping out at us at this stage.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions of John?
No.
Okay, great. Thank you, John. Appreciate it.
Well,
With that, go ahead, John.
no, you're welcome.
Okay, guess with that, we'll turn to our financial update and outlook.
Okay. And so
We could advance.
perfect. Thank you. Okay, so you may recall from our last meeting that we had a healthy cash balance of approximately $12.6 million at the beginning of November. And we had a conversation where we were going to be transferring $6 million from our operating account to our investment portfolio. So I wanted to share that that has happened. And therefore, when you're looking at the chart in front of you, you'll see that we have approximately $6.5 million available in our account at TD for our operating funds. You will see that increase to about $8.5 million once we get towards the end of February. And that is when we have our first spring financial aid disbursement. And then we will continue to see a slightly declining balance through the end of the fiscal year, which is the general trend that we're used to seeing. If I can ask you to advance to the next slide. And this is just a recap. The first column recognizes what the balance was at the beginning of the fiscal year. The second column recognizes what the actual transactions have been for the line items up until the midpoint of the year. We also show in the third column what our transactions are expected to be for the second half of the year. And then finally, the last column shows what the total inflows and outflows will be for the full year. And are there any questions on cash flow?
None for me. Okay, great. Thank you, John.
Thank you. And I'll turn it over to Andrea now.
Good evening,
Thanks,
Andrew.
and good evening. And one thing I'm wondering about, our view on the Zoom seems to be a little more compact than usual, so I'm not sure if whoever's running that has another way to present that, but anyway, so before Jason shares the update on the revenue and spending and the projection, I just wanted to talk for a few minutes about enrollment. So just give a brief update on enrollment and its net financial impact on the budget. So this slide here illustrates various enrollment scenarios to really show the relationship between various levels of enrollment and financial performance. So if we start looking at the middle scenario, the one that has a 0 on the bar, that represents our FY23 approved budget. And if you recall, it was an average of 7% down from last year in terms of credits. It really fall was down 6% and spring down 8%. And that's what we had put in the budget that balanced our budget. Where we are now is we're sort of debating what this color is, but we'll call it peach. So the bar that is looks peach or orange or coral, depending on your eyes, that represents the current projection. So when you see Jason's revenue spending projection, it will reflect these numbers. So and this reflects fall at actual credits, which is approximately very close to last year. So no change from last year, and spring is being represented at budget, which is about 8% down from last year. So still somewhat conservative, but in this scenario, you can see that it brings us a favorable variance to budget at about $353,000. And then because where we are in the cycle of understanding our enrollment, it's a little premature to know what our spring enrollment will be. So we just wanted to share some scenarios, both favorable and unfavorable to budget. So if you look to the left, the 3 scenarios on the left show enrollment, what the financial impact of enrollment scenarios would be if spring is down 10%, 12%, and 15% from last year. We really think those scenarios are fairly unlikely, but just wanted to show you, potential downside. Where we might be more likely to land is to the right. If spring ends up being even with last year, which would be ahead of the budget that we assumed would be 8% down, and with fall ahead of budget already, that would give us a net financial impact of just under about $800,000. And then if spring is ahead of budget by 5%, that would give us a net financial impact of about $1.1 million. So I'm not sure where we'll end up at this point. In February, we'll have a better sense of where spring ends up, and then in March it'll be more accurate. So we go through the scenario every semester where we make our reasonable predictions at whatever point in time we're at, and at this point we're comfortable with the peach scenario, but we think that's fairly conservative. So any questions about this before we ask Jason to share the revenue and spending?
Yeah, Andrew, thanks for walking us through how this chart worked. When I looked at this yesterday, I didn't quite understand how it was working, but now I do understand the numbers, and the 800,000 makes sense. It's it's top of the range. If spring's up 5%, we could be at $1.2 million, which is the 800,000 over the 400,000 of the coral. I'll call it coral to be versus peach. But yeah, I get it. It makes sense.
One small comment. Let me just add a piece, because again, I think that top line number is really helpful. And I'll share, by the way, trustees, we're 2 weeks out from the start of the semester. So where is enrollment? We're actually somewhere between 6 and 8% up. Mind you, we get anywhere between 12 and 15% of our enrollment in the next 2 weeks. This is always the real difficulty of a community college enrollment cycle. But I say that because even if we beat the 5% and we're $1 million up, again, my reminder, especially with our stakeholders internal, they're like, oh, you're $1 million to the good. You all have, in this current working budget, prescribed $4 million out of reserve to underwrite the structural deficit, if you will. So we have $1 million against that. We don't have $4 million against that. And again, that's the norming we are attempting to do internally, particularly with our employees around. This is good, though we are certainly beating our budgeted enrollment, but we are by no means out of the woods. So I just wanted to use this chart to help put a fine point on that. Because again, we have lots to be proud of, trustees. Our faculty, our staff have really been doing well to beat the enrollment projection, but there's still work ahead.
Yeah, that's well said, Dr. Cook.
So if there are no other questions, I'll pass it along to Jason.
Thank you. All right, so this is our detailed version of the December revenue and spending report. If nobody has any questions on this, we could advance to the summary. All right. So this projection assumes an enrollment of just over 72,000 credits, with fall credits as actual and spring and summer credits down 8%, compared to FY22, which is what we budgeted. As of right now, we're projecting a $1.2 million favorable variance. We have revenue with a positive variance of $909,000. That's made up of an additional $454,000 from FY22 formula funding that was added to the FY23 base. We also have an additional $426,000 from the fall enrollment, which is ahead of budget. As Andrea mentioned, we're still waiting on spring figures. When we look at expenses, we have a favorable variance of $330,000. In full-time salaries, we had a favorable variance of $742,000, which is made up of unfilled positions in the amount of $372,000. We also transferred $370,000 to part-time and operating from full-time. In part-time, we have the transfers of $114,000 to increase our part-time. And then we had an additional $73,000 due to an increase in adjunct related to our enrollment increase in the fall. As far as operating, we have an increase in projected expenses of $256,000, and that was made up of transfers from the salary budget to cover vacancies with temporary consultants. Any questions or comments?
So Jason, a lot of that expense movement is geography between line items, but so
Exactly.
net, so unfilled positions, the 372
Yep.
is really what's hanging out there. And how many positions does that represent?
I'd have to get back to you. It's probably maybe a dozen or so.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question relative to the increase in tuition and fees. Is there any idea of where the enrollment is going, into what areas, medical, dental program, etc.? Do you have any information on that?
Jeff, I can jump in a little bit. We certainly know in some ways the tide that really often shapes our enrollment is general studies students. They're typically 23, 24, 25% of our enrollment. And when we have more students who are coming to STCC and saying, let me take some general ed classes, or I don't know what I want to do yet, 1 in 4, 1 in 5 students are in there. And there's so much volume there. That's where a lot of this enrollment changes. We actually have seen some declines on the retention side in some of our health programs, which often have some of the most consistent enrollment. And so we'll look to build that back up in the fall. And then again, STEM is a whole different conversation because there's relatively larger and relatively smaller programs in there with different considerations. So this is us in some ways, and I've got a slide on this with enrollment, us kind of putting a floor, hopefully, on the enrollment trend and trying to build back a little bit.
Yep.
But general studies that's one of those key conversations for us internally.
Thank you.
Dr. Cook, I have a question. So I see that we have a positive, and we know that we took out a reserve just in case because things happen during the year. But let's say we end up as a positive year and we have pulled from the reserve. do we roll that back or do we put it back in reserve?
Yeah, in some ways that you got to sort of, the way I understand this, and I've got our fiscal team, Trustee Roldan, to keep me clear on this. This is sort of the revenue and spending, but when our fiscal gets audited, that's a different consideration that is sort of all in. And when there is a net positive on the other side of audit, that gets rolled into reserves. For us, the dance is always how big the net positive is in relation to, by the way, how much you've allocated in a reserve adjustment. So let's say, for argument's sake, it holds at $1 million after audit. It would mean we would actually need to potentially reconcile where only we pulled out 3 million from reserves to ensure we were balanced, as opposed to the $4 million that trustees have already authorized. I hope that's a semblance of it. Andrea, let me check with you around whether that's a reasonable interpretation.
I think in terms of the mechanics, I would let John answer that, but I think just, I guess another way to look at this is that it's not like we pulled $4 million out of reserves, and then we would have to put it back. I mean, it's really more of a, in a way, like a backstop to avoid losses. So if we end up, let's say, with a 1.2 million, if the end of the year looks like this scenario, then we would just pull, we would need $1.2 million less from reserves than what we had anticipated. And then in terms of what happens with the audit, I would let John just kind of jump in about that.
Well, let me, John, too. And again, Norman, with John Tudrin, our controller and assistant vice president here, we've got 6 million in cash also forecasted. So it may even be, we don't even need to pull out 3 million from reserves. We might pull off the cash balance. John, again, there's different mechanics here, right?
Yeah, and actually, and if I can just jump in first, there's sort of like, there's a difference between like the definition of reserve and then sort of where the cash buckets are. And so it's, we're sort of commingling those discussions. So whether we clearly wouldn't need to pull the money out of investments based on our cash balance, but if we otherwise had a loss, it would still be considered using reserves, even though it wouldn't be pulling out of the bank.
So if I understand correctly, you don't pull the money out of the reserve. We voted in to use the money. It's there. It's available. So
Right.
Let's say at the end of the year we needed 2.3 million. Then that's what we would take out of the reserve, and that would be it.
Right. I'll let John Tudrin
Okay.
jump in for a
Yeah.
sec, just to,
No.
in case there's something we missed that you want to clarify.
Yeah, you're exactly correct. We would only pull out the amount that we would need. There are other factors that come into the play when you're looking at the full financial statements, because there's other factors that we don't budget for, such as our different GASBs, for pension, and other factors, accounting for leases, depreciation. Those are other factors that we really don't get into the weeds into the weeds here. So those are all
like
factors.
the increases, you get increases, insurance increases, policy increases. Yeah, You're right. I got you.
Yep. But you're right. I mean, the short answer is that we wouldn't pull out any more than we would need to balance the budget or to balance the revenue and expenses.
Thank you for clarifying, guys. Appreciate that. That was it.
Good discussion. Anything else on the projections? Okay, with that, we're on to the president's perspective. Dr. Cook.
So again, I get to now say Happy New Year, everybody. And it's incredible in 2023. So I'm embarking on my 7th budget planning cycle, which is just incredible to contemplate here. A few things, again, I'll take the next slide and then the slide after. Again, because of that 7th run through, everybody, you'll see we've got a pretty well honed approach where, again, we're going to do some framing today. Cabinet has already, again, put their shoulder to the wheel, trustees, to already be working on this. Our senior leadership team has certainly been thinking a lot about this. You'll see a first draft, as again, is a pretty well-defined process at this point in March, a second draft in April, and again, bearing something unforeseen, seeking your approval and then recommendation to the full board of a final draft and budget for May. I think again we're in good shape, solid shape to do that. What I wanted to do is help call out today with not a slide on all of them, but some of the key budget drivers, just again frame and see what questions this committee may have. You've been essential to helping us weather the pandemic. And again, as we're looking to, again, find ourselves in sustainability in a short 3 fiscal years, just kind of map ahead what some of these drivers are. So with the next slide, you'll see a revisit of enrollment. Obviously, there's the cliff. It's hard to describe it as anything other than that. There's both the pre-pandemic version that was well in place, and then during the pandemic, there's the floor that I've hopefully articulated for everyone. You'll see both the current fiscal year of 23, what we budgeted just shy of 70,000, and you'll see in the projection, which is going to be maybe more closer to 73,000. But again, in the future forecasting, we've sort of put a base floor under these as we sort of mapped out, particularly with some of the capital projects like that school of health relocation. If we can hold as a base 70,000 credits, again, it helps us build some of these scenarios out. Again, if we do better, it gives us some of the flexibility that we're seeing this year and what we don't have to pull on for reserves. And frankly, gives us a chance to think differently about some of the capital needs around the institution. Let me just stand there for a second and see if there might be any questions about enrollment and sort of that look ahead.
Yeah, Dr. Cook, just around the 70,000 per year. What flexibility or what can we do proactively to, I don't want to say insure because you can't insure anything, but
Yeah.
I mean, to kind of drive towards that as opposed to reacting to where we land?
Yeah, for me, and again, I appreciate the question, Mac, because I'm trying to get us to renorm internally to the institution. The piece that we can manage is retention. What's harder for us to actually control is recruitment. Because again, macroeconomics being what they are, unemployment continues to be low. That conspires against community colleges. We don't carry wait lists by and large, and in health programs, we can't necessarily take more nurses because we only have X number of nursing faculty to teach them on. So what we can do is continue to try to push at our semester over semester and our year over year retention rate. And there are lots of efforts that we have in place. We talk about them in internal and external committee. We can certainly bring them forward in other venues, but we certainly can work on, if we have about a 70% fall to spring retention rate, just 3 percentage points difference will really help the overall fiscal health of the institution. And certainly it speaks to student success differently as well. So there's a lot there on the retention side that we can and need to continue to be doing.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of the strategic work that we did and what do we have in that around retention? Like, what are we doing to help drive that number?
I'm looking at cabinet and it's like, I can look to each one of them because there's so much. Let me go to our Vice President of Student Affairs, Darcy Kemp, who can talk a lot about success funding and how that maps in some different ways. But Darcy, is there just one example of sort of restructure, reimagination that you want to help call forward?
That's really putting me on the spot to pick one example, because as you just said, like, every single cabinet member could highlight the retention efforts that we're collectively putting forth. What I can say, I guess, without being specific, because there would be like 12 examples, is that we are not leaving anything to chance. We are literally looking at every possible scenario of how to support students as they persist from semester to semester. And it is very individualized. It is very student-centered and student-specific. It can be so specific that it's down to contacting a student about a particular course they might be missing that they need for their program. So I'm sorry that I can't just highlight one, but I would say collectively, like, we are doing everything that we can to ensure that every student possible is persisting from semester to semester. And we go back 5 semesters worth. So it's not just that we're looking at those who are here in the fall. We're looking at every single student who's been here at some point, who's not currently registered for spring, and working with them to get back enrolled. I hope that helps.
Very helpful. Thank you.
So if that's enrollment, and again, we may revisit this assumption around what's the carry forward floor on enrollment. Again, it's going to constantly be a conversation. Let me take the next slide, which is around student fees. So again, for trustees, certainly be clear-eyed. We are the most affordable higher ed institution in the city of Springfield, bar none. And here is the look on that. If you start in fiscal year 21, now 22 and 23, our base fees, our key fee structures, you'll see a general education fee and a capital improvement fee. Those are, again, trustee approved. We've held them constant the last 3 years. And right now, as one of our working budget assumptions, is we will hold those fees constant for a 4th year. Again, really continuing to try to hold down that affordability in the name of access piece. In this case, certainly on the recruitment side, and again, as an example of in service to retention. Now, there's a couple pieces here. Notice along the bottom, tuition continues to be set by the Board of Higher Education, whereas you all set the fees. And you'll notice how constant the Board of Higher Ed has kept tuition. Frankly, they've frozen it for the better part of a decade plus. So obviously we have had to fill that hole. We've used this structure. Again, we're trying to hold the parent fees. The piece that we're going to end up talking with all of you about, and you'll see it in the box there, is additional fees. Semester fees like a per semester technology fee, and some of those program and course specific fees like a health program fee for a nursing program, for example. We probably cannot hold the line on freezing that aspect of it. There's just so many costs, particularly on the personnel side, that we map against those type of programs. So we will certainly be revisiting with all of you, but wanted you to already have a view on, again, how well we can do to hold that affordability piece well in place. And by the way, the federal government did raise the Pell threshold. What this likely does, and we've done this in the past, is when we map our fees against typical Pell eligible students, it just puts a little bit more distance that they might be able to take out or actually have access to Pell. That means they're taking out less loans. But again, let me pause there and see what questions the committee may have around student fees.
Dr. Cook, I just have a question. I respect and agree with holding those fees, but considering where inflation is going and where salaries may be heading, and looking at 70,000 credits with a $4 million budget deficit, when do we start thinking about increasing fees, or will we hope for enrollment to add to our earnings like we're looking at in 23?
I believe that's the view of our CFO, by the way, also, is that Andrea is in my ear, Jeff, saying, it's a nice outlook and it's a nice starting point. But Andrea's been thinking about this for months and frankly, weeks and months now. The idea of we lose ground, of course, year over year on just some of those fundamentals like inflation and the cost of even the projects on campus and what that runs us. So at least I wanted you all to see the starting place, even if it's not where we land, and especially how we'll map and frame the rationale for you all to consider on the committee.
Thanks.
Yeah, so Trustee Sadler's kind of going where I was thinking about in terms of modeling, right? Because this is one feeder into it.
Yep.
But like, what's the breaking point where we have to say we've got to increase fees, and then we have to understand, you know, the impacts of that. So I was talking about the strategy document earlier, and retention is like, okay, what do we know turns students away versus maybe not so much, and all that has to come into play. But a model that shows what that breaking point is, and when you guys kind of pull that together, that'd be very helpful for us to see.
Absolutely, that's definitely the cue. And again, one of the versions is certainly that Pell model that we've shown to the committee in the past. We'll definitely map that.
Yep.
And especially as we've gotten into some of the course program specific, we'll definitely do some modeling in that realm as well. Andrew, did we miss anything on the fee side of things, given our own conversations?
No, I think that covers it pretty well.
I want to thank you because I was wondering how that structure worked, and I see a better picture today. Thanks.
And do know, trustees, one of the things that's always an unknown is the base state appropriation, right? The amount that we get from the Commonwealth, it's subject to the legislative process. Often the legislature is not hitting that mark, certainly by our timetable. They've got their own timetable. So it's often best guess scenario. And that has some influence on where we land in terms of fee projection, fee forecasting. So again, I put that placeholder in as part of all this as well. I don't have a slide, but full-time personnel, you'll see as a third item to just call out. What I would share with committee is we certainly look through retirements and on what we would consider attrition as part of the way you've seen some of the vacancies, and we certainly look in those areas for places we do not need to fill. We'll take that clear eye with personnel, but when it's 60, a good 60% of our budget, we're obviously going to have to take a hard look about what we can afford next year. And again, if we have some aggregate considerations, what we'll do is we'll learn from the past, and we'll use an executive session, quite frankly, to talk about personnel, given how difficult it is otherwise in open meeting. So I just wanted to note that piece. Second one, again, I don't believe we have a slide for this one. Under operation supports, or sorry, under facilities, it's almost been a sort of article of faith that we would put 3.1 million in for facilities on our own dime every year in a stick budget. That may not be possible. Again, we've got a major project that we're looking ahead to, which is the Building 20 relocation. We certainly have been better at codifying the IT and cyber needs of our institution, and that works against that 3.1 million, frankly. So again, I just want to help articulate already the ability to sustain our own capital spending on IT and facilities may be difficult. We'll walk you through what that looks like. We do know our allocation from DCAM for deferred maintenance for the next 5 years. It's in the same ballpark about what it's been for the last 5 years, call it 2.2 million. And again, we got the largest allotment of the 15 community colleges, which is good. But again, just wanted to note the ability to sustain that really sort of singular 3.1 million is going to be hard for us. And certainly with operations, you'll see, again, this is almost sort of my own working notes here, just so everybody sees the thinking. Equipment, professional development, food and travel, all that stuff does add up. We are looking at all of that in terms of really trying to build to sustainability over this 3 and 4 year fiscal year planning window. So happy to take questions on personnel, maintenance and projects and operational considerations.
Dr. Cook, I guess on the projects, the 3.1, I hear what you're saying, but it really makes me think about how clear we have to be in terms of, you know, the projects we take on and the value that they drive for us, right? Because if the 3.1, because I know we haven't spent the 3.1 the last couple of years, right? So it's actually been building, but to the extent that we start to get below the 3.1, we have to be laser focused on making sure we're working on the right projects that drive the right value and set us up strategically where we want to be going forward.
Yep. Again, I think to be fair to our fiscal team, they might say we've not necessarily underspent on the 3.1, just the project timing has been the lag, not the need for those funds. I do want to do well by them, because our facilities people in particular would say, I could spend 6 million. I can't do it in a fiscal year, but we've got that much in deferred maintenance. The point is certainly well made around, we're clear, you know, I would say this, with the proposal, and I was going to mention this a little bit down the road, by a working group of the trustees that you will all see at the January full board meeting for bylaw revisions, you're going to see the recommendation to stand up a facilities committee, a facilities and capital committee. That gives even more insight with us as administration and trustees around that very point. The high value have to have work to plan for these types of projects.
Yeah, Dr. Cook, I think that's a fair call out, you know, that folks could spend more than the 3, but the reality is you don't carry over the money. The year ends and you start a new budget, right? So we got to make sure we're just eyes wide open in terms of what we're approving, what we're spending on. How does that look for future years, not just the short term, right? So I mean, you said it all.
Yeah. I can't wait to get out of Building 20. We've spent more in emergency funds on that building. I mean, I'm telling you.
Yep.
One more slide with 2 points, and that's around, I didn't want to lose track of one other revenue line that we don't often talk about, and that is the foundation support that the college's foundation provides. So this is the historical look. And what you'll see is 2 key elements that essentially the Stick Foundation has provided pre-COVID. You'll see somewhere in the order of $225,000 or $250,000 to support institutional aid. This has been typically bundled with operational dollars where we are augmenting financial aid packages. You'll also see, relatively speaking, about 100,000 towards capital projects. Obviously, during the pandemic, that changed, particularly last year, where we took out all the institutional aid whatsoever. This year, you'll see a rebound back. I just wanted to note, looking ahead, our foundation may not be able to sustain this renewed approach. Obviously, investments have taken a bit of a beating in the current stock market. The amount that the foundation itself has under investment has declined overall. I just want to be very open-eyed around the ability for the foundation to continue to sustain its support. Our Vice President of Advancement and External Affairs, we've got Dr. Shea Butler on the call. She serves as executive director to the STIC Foundation. She and I certainly are working and having these conversations ourselves around how do we help forecast for the foundation, how much it can afford, and then the conduit back to all of us for inclusion in the draft budget. I say that because you'll see on the agenda the idea of institution-funded student aid, so separate from federal, separate from that Pell, separate from a lot of the mass conversations, because you may have seen in the duly inaugurated Governor of Massachusetts address, we hear again about free community college. We hear again about free community college. And in particular, the focus has been on the packaging of students. It may mean there is a bit of a reprieve potentially coming up where there is even more money via the state in the packaging of support for students that may lessen again some of the impact right now on the foundation. But again, that remains to be seen. But again, I wanted to note the foundation aspect of the budget. Happy to take questions on that. Okay, last thing is on the, speaking of the capital project and school health relocation, I noted the development, the recommendation that you'll see in short order around the creation of a facilities and capital committee within the Board of Trustees bylaws. You'll see that likely next week in advance of the full board meeting. The School of Health project itself continues to move along earnestly. Again, we've talked about the identification of the architect. The architect has been on ground on the campus meeting, particularly with faculty and our program directors in these health areas. We probably won't see more tangible action in terms of development of scope of work plans, things like that, for them bidding on by contractors, well, probably into summer of next year. But again, we're doing well. We've got the DCAM project manager who is certainly well invested in all of this. And again, we're doing well. I wish I could somehow speed up that timetable, but these projects really do take a long, long time. And that's the outlook for the committee.
Great, thank you, Dr. Cook. Any questions or comments on Dr. Cook's remarks? Okay, moving forward, our old and new business. So we don't have any old business, but you see here, new business item, revert to on-campus meetings. Is there a, I know I had conversations with someone, I'm not quite sure who it was, but I was saying April was what I was thinking, but is there some reason why April is not a good date and it should be sometime sooner?
So no, just two things for the committee to know. The open meeting law right now, to be able to meet via virtual options, is set to expire in March. So you're definitely on MAC that the idea of the Board of Trustees in any form or fashion when there's a quorum to meet might sunset in March if the legislature with the governor signing it don't take action on that. What I would forecast is certainly there are other trustees, looking at our chair who has certainly heard from some of them of a desire to meet in person. So I do know that the full Board of Trustees is slated to meet in person at the March meeting. I also know internal, external, through Janae, the chair of internal, external, they plan to meet in person at their February meeting. But certainly Trustee Starks, and as the chair of this committee, keeping the committee virtual February, March, no doubt that's your prerogative, you and with Mary Kate. Just, we don't know yet what your choices will be as of the end of March. So that's really just the look ahead to prepare everybody for.
Excellent. Thank you. Very helpful. Okay, any other new business? Okay, looks like the date of our next meeting is February 13th, which is pretty amazing. It's already flying by. So, I didn't start off by saying Happy New Year because it already feels like we're well past that, but Happy New Year, everyone. Great to see you all again. And I look forward to a very prosperous 2023 working with all of you as we drive forward our financials around STCC. And with that, Nene, can you take the roll to adjourn the meeting?
Yes, Mary Kate Murin,
Yes.
Max Starks,
Yes.
Samalit Hogan, Norm Roldan,
Yes.
and Jeff Sattler.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Have a great night. Thank you,
Good to see
Nene.
Have a great
Thanks
night.
again.
You too.
Bye-bye.
All right, guys. Bye-bye.